We record in order to make the sessions available for those who weren't able to attend, or for anyone who was attending but who wants to review, or for the general public. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. With these words, we affirm that it is a mitzvah to engage in words of Torah and to study our sacred traditions and texts. And it is very, very special to do so with such a wonderful group of eager learners. So once again, welcome. I don't think there's anyone on the Zoom today whom I have not met, but some of you may be interacting with one another for the very first time. We have been for a long time, I guess the right way of putting it in light of what we're studying this mini-mester is for many moons. We have been engaged in an extended study of Gemara, which is the insider's way of referring to the study of Talmud. Talmud is comprised of layers and layers of rabbinic commentary. Nominally, the whole Talmud is a kind of like a handbook for all matters of Jewish life, thought, and practice. Though, so far as a handbook goes, it's not a very good handbook because it can't be held in the hand. It can only be contained on a shelf, or nowadays, actually, I do have the entire Talmud in my hand right here. It's pretty extraordinary. Sefaria now has an app. So you can actually follow everything on your phone. It's not great for your eyes, but it's really nice to have the Talmud with you wherever you go. I brought one volume of Talmud with me from work. So this is my new edition of the Koran Talmud Bavli, meaning the Babylonian Talmud. You can see from the design on the front, there's always like a cool eye-catching graphic that this tractate is all about the Jewish New Year, about Rosh Ha-Shanah, but you can actually see if you read closely, it actually says Beitza Rosh Ha-Shanah. So Beitza and Rosh Ha-Shanah are actually two independent tractates of the Babylonian Talmud, back to back in sequence, from the order of the Talmud known as Moed, which means seasons or fixed times. Beitza and Rosh Hashanah are both fairly compact tractates. They're small. So, I mean, this doesn't seem small to you, but this is actually two tractates included in a single volume. There's not a lot written about Rosh Hashanah in the Talmud. And you'll see there's not a whole lot written about Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. So we're actually going to start with some biblical texts before we even touch on the Gemara today. What I would invite you to do, and I will send this around through Natalie, our office administrator, who corresponds with anyone who's signed up for this class. And if you haven't officially signed up, we promise we're not here to spam you, but it really is helpful to let the temple office know, or even just drop me a line, say, hey, you may not have noticed, but I was in class this morning. That way we'll make sure you get on the mailing list and receive the little summaries that I send I try to get them out before Shabbat. Even if you're not a temple member, it's great. We love having you. So just drop me a line or tell the temple office that you'd like to be on the mailing list for the Rabbi Blake's Talmud class. This week, Natalie will also circulate the following document, which is the syllabus for the next 4 weeks. We got all organized around this. So you can see that Cantor Kleinman is actually going to be joining us for a few sessions. She's on vacation this week, but she's actually going to be team teaching with me, and you will love interacting with her. She has not only an incredible voice and a wonderful heart, but she has a brilliant mind, particularly for Talmud study. And I have enjoyed studying Talmud with her. So today, here are the topics that we're looking at. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So this is an introduction to the High Holy Day season, or the Days of Awe. We have a number of texts picked out. The first few are biblical. So this is Leviticus, Numbers, and the book of Ezekiel. We'll look at those. Then you have a Mishnah, a Tosefta. I would not expect you to remember that term, but I'll tell you what it is when we get to it. And then two biblical passages from the book of Leviticus about Yom Kippur. So we're going to look at some foundational texts about the High Holy Days. If there is time, there's an additional thought piece called Why 2 Days, or Why Do We Observe 2 Days of Rosh Ha-Shanah, which everyone asks me, and the definitive answer is included in this very short but friendly article. And then hopefully we'll get to a kind of framing text for what the season is all about that actually is from the Talmud. So we only have one Gemara passage picked out for us today. Everything else is Torah, Tosefta, Mishnah, Bible. Next week, all of our texts are from the Babylonian Talmud tractate Rosh Ha-Shanah, which are all about the sounding of the shofar and what that means. Our third class is all about teshuvah. If you don't know what that word means, you definitely will by the time our study is up. And we have several passages picked out from tractate Rosh Ha-Shanah and tractate Yoma, which is the tractate about Yom Kippur. And finally, our last session before the holidays, 1 week or 4 weeks from today, we're going to focus on Yom Kippur itself with 5 or so long or short or medium-sized passages from Tractate Yoma, which focus on fasting and on tshuva. And again, if you don't know what tshuva is, you will. So that's and the hope here is not only is this a great refresher on the mechanics and methodologies of learning Talmud, but also it is really a wonderful spiritual and intellectual preparatory time for getting ready for the high holidays. So once again, welcome. And we're going to begin. And the nice thing is the syllabus is hyperlinked. So when you receive it, you're able to actually click on the text and it will take you directly to the passage in Sefaria. So I'm just not sure if the screen share allows me to directly for you to see the links, but everyone can see the text on the screen now, correct? Okay, great. So we are looking at a section from Leviticus chapter 23. You can see up here the passage. And this is part of the biblical presentation of the festival and holiday calendar. Leviticus 23 comes from a Torah portion called Emor. It is read in its season, usually in mid to late spring, like usually around May. And it is also read on the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So passages from this section of the Torah are also designated as the scriptural readings for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And so that's why this is my bar mitzvah portion, or at least a part of it is my bar mitzvah portion, because I became bar mitzvah on the first day of Sukkot, on Chag Sukkot. And Leviticus is read, even though you have to like find a Torah scroll and wind it all the way to Leviticus, when in October, of course, you're right at the beginning of the scroll in the ordinary cycle of readings. But because this part of the Torah talks about the holidays and observances of the biblical festival calendar, the rabbis designated excerpts from this parsha to be read on the pilgrimage festivals. And you can even see, if you're looking at like the part that I'm just kind of casually scrolling through, it talks about the various festivals. These are here's how the passage begins. Ele moadei Adonai. These are the set times, the appointed seasons of Adonai, the sacred occasions, mikra'e kodesh in Hebrew, asher tikru otam b'moadam, which you shall celebrate each at its appointed time. And then it goes on to say, in the first month, and I'd like you to just hold on to that, in the first month, b'chodesh harishon, ba'arba'a asar lachodesh, ben harbaim pesach l'Adonai. So if I had asked you, you're a smart and learned crowd, but if I had asked you, in what month in the ordinal numbers is Pesach observed, you might have had to jog your heads a little bit before some of you would have gotten the right answer, which is Pesach is observed in month number 1 of the Jewish calendar. Right. Obviously, this is a bit of a head spinner because the new year is not observed in the first month. All of this is part of the puzzle that we're going to be assembling. And that's why I indicated that the tractate Rosh Ha-Shanah, which we're going to finally get to at the end of today's learning, is all about determining months and years and how you figure out what time things are supposed to be observed. That's the gist of tractate Rosh Hashanah for the first 3 quarters of the book. It doesn't even talk about what you do on Rosh Hashanah. It just talks about how do you know that it is Rosh Hashanah. But Pesach is actually observed in the first month of the year. So try just to hold your confusion and live with it, because I would be the first to tell you it's confusing. So it goes on to talk about Pesach, and then it goes on to talk about the various offerings and grain that is brought. Then it talks about counting the days. This is the practice we know as Omer, and leading up to the Feast of First Fruits, which we call Shavuot. Some of the holidays go by names today that are not the same as the names they were known by in biblical times. And that's going to be a theme of our study as well. So if you're going in the calendar, if Pesach is at the beginning of the year, springtime, Shavuot is so early spring, though this year Pesach is on the later end of things because it's a leap year. When I say this year, I mean this coming Jewish year. Pesach will be observed, I think, the 3rd or even 4th week of April, 2024. And therefore, the holidays are going to be late next year. People are talking to me and say, are the holidays early or late this year? And I say, they're always right on time. The high holidays are always the beginning of the month of Tishrei, 4 weeks from tomorrow. But September 15th at sundown is when they start. I don't know. Do you think that's early or late? I think it's medium early. Okay. And now we're talking about reaping and sowing. And then finally, we get to the passage that I've brought for our study. So, Vaidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, just a formula for introducing a new paragraph, particularly in the book of Leviticus. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, I hate that saying. I think you just put a colon and that stands for saying. But Adonai spoke to Moses, Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, speak to the Israelites as follows. B'chodesh ha-shevi'i, in the 7th month, be'echad lachodesh, on the 1st of the month, yihyeh lachem Shabbaton. You should have a Shabbaton, like an extra Sabbath or a super Sabbath. Here they just say, you shall observe complete rest. Okay, Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. 4 words that are easy to translate but hard to understand. We'll put it together. Zichron, from Zecher, like Yizkor, which means remembrance or remembering. And by the way, loving Sefaria these days. Click on a word. Now you get the dictionary, and this is from the Larry Pierce at the Online Bible from Open Scriptures, but it's an outstanding lexical reference. So Zichron or Zikaron, memorial or remembrance. It even shows you all of the places where the word or its cognates are found in the scripture. Look in Leviticus 23, Exodus, Numbers. It's pretty wild what you can do with Sefaria these days. I feel like I say that every time, but that's because every time we use Sefaria, they've improved it. Okay, Zichron, a remembrance of Trua. Anyone know what a Trua is? It's a word you probably have heard.
Trumpet blast?
Yeah, it's one of the sounds that the shofar makes. So a trua is a kind of blast. Doesn't say exactly what instrument or how you're going to make the blast, but remembering the blast, mikra kodesh. Mikra means something that happens, it's an event, and kodesh means sanctified or sacred, holy. So literally remembering the blast, holy event. Okay, here they fill in the translation in the idiomatic English by saying a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. Nice job, by the way. I love how they incorporated the word zichron through the verb commemorated. Though, again, the Hebrew is somewhat more ambiguous. It shall be the first of the months for you. On the seventh month, the first of the month, Yihiyeh lachem Shabbaton, you shall have a Shabbaton, a stop day, Zichron Teruah Mikra Kodesh. Literally, remembering blast holy day. That's all we've got. Day 1, month 7, Shabbaton, remembering a blast, holy occasion. Like, it's almost like you ever see these word clouds? It's sort of a free associative learning method that incorporates a little bit of low tech, where if I'm in a room with a bunch of learners, I can say, okay, tell me what you think about when you think about Rosh Ha-Shanah. And people go to their phones and they'd start texting to a special number: shofar, apples and honey, white robes, boring, like whatever. And then you get a whole group of people, and the computer throws the words up on the screen in a design or an abstract pattern. And the words that came up the most dominate the cloud. But then if you look closely, you can see other things like, oh, somebody said Rabbi, and somebody else said Cantor, and somebody else said music. But the big one in the middle is shofar, right? So word cloud. This is, the way it's written is almost like a word cloud. Shabbaton, Zichron, Teruah, Mikra, Kodesh. Like 5 words that make you think of this day, at least in the biblical mind. It goes on to tell you a little, so that's the what. That's what month 7, day 1 looks like, or is. The next verse says, Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu, phrase that comes up again and again and again in the Torah. Any kind of work you must not do. Here they say you shall not work at your occupations. V'hikravtem ishe l'Adonai, but you must bring an offering by fire to Adonai. Hikravtem ishe, it literally says you should bring a lamb to Adonai, but the implication is that this is a burnt offering. And that's it. The very next line, which we'll look at a little bit later this morning, talks about the Day of Atonement. So we have a total of 3 verses about Rosh Hashanah in the entire Torah. These 3. This is what the Torah tells us about Rosh Hashanah. So as you kind of take that in, I'd like to pause to ask you, what are you observing? Does this surprise you? What questions does this raise for you? Not rhetorical questions, by the way. Inviting you to chime in now.
No head of the year, no apples and honey.
Great. Definitely no apples and honey, and nothing called head of the year, which Hebrew, the direct translation is Rosh Ha-Shanah. Great. Yeah, one way of getting into the question I'm asking is by playing a game of what's missing. So the things you might expect the Torah to tell you about this day would include the name of the day. It doesn't call it that. It just says Shabbaton, Zichron, Teruah, Mikra, Kodesh. The way I translated it, like really word cloudy, like Shabbaton, a big Shabbat, remembering blasts, remembering a blast, holy occasion. That's what we got, Mom and Dad.
It's remarkable how much has been accreted in the centuries since. I mean, Unatana Tokev, Vinu Malkenu, all of this preparation for, the beginning of days of awe, all leading up to Yom Kippur. There's no notion that any of that is anywhere in the picture.
Thank you. Great. Yep. No Unatana Tokef, no book of life, no judgment, no idea of repentance or repair. There's nothing about relationships. There's nothing about prayer. There's nothing about, it does say bring an offering. Okay. Nothing about, I don't know, apples and honey, wearing Louboutins, all the things that we think about in association with the high holidays. Judy Gross, and then Steve Maskett, and then Aaron and Rob.
What makes it a high holiday? What is this for? What are we celebrating or memorizing or resting for?
The answer is the Torah is not telling us. And that's fine. Again, I want us to live in both what is there, but also what is not there. So, right, what is this? And by the way, is this even a high holiday? For a major holiday, this does not seem to get a whole lot of press. Right? 3 verses, one of which is God said to Moses. So 2 verses, one of which says, Shabbaton, remembering a blast, holy occasion, bring a sacrifice. That's it. I'm going to show you one other verse in a moment from the Hebrew Bible, from the Tanakh, not even from Torah. But I'm not sure, in fact, I am sure that verse is not going to make this any easier, or, this is not going to resolve the dilemma that you've identified here. Steve Maskett. And then I see Aaron and Rob, and then I'll get Susan Esther.
I find it kind of interesting that the concept of Shabbaton needs clarification in the Bible, that in this group of verses, that not only does it involve a sacrifice, but it involves not working at your occupations.
Right. And that's not uncommon. Typically throughout the Torah, though, of course, this could be checked with a concordance. So I'm just kind of going on my kind of like general recollection, is that when the Torah identifies a day as a Shabbat or a Shabbaton, it often adds the clarifying statement, Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. You must not work at your occupations.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Maybe it means that for the biblical community that was the intended readership or listening audience to this text, it needed to be clarified, as if the word Shabbaton itself is not sufficient to communicate what you are supposed to do, or more particularly not supposed to do on this day. But yeah, Steve, your observation is quite correct. And this, by the way, is consistent with most biblical holidays. They are, in addition to whatever specific observance for that holiday or that season is instructed, many of them are also Shabbaton, meaning Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu, you must not work at your occupations. The only thing you're supposed to be doing is observing the festival.
Where else is Truah even referred to in?
There are other places, and this is, again, one of the beautiful things about Sepharia, is that question is now very easily answered, that if I go to the text that we're looking at and I find the word that I'm curious about, in your case, Steve, you said, well, where else is Truah mentioned? You go to Truah, you double click it, and then you slide over to the right margin, and you can see here Truah, and it tells you what it is. A shout or blast of war, alarm, or joy. Doesn't, by the way, necessarily say a shofar. We think shofar, but the Torah thus far has not mentioned the word shofar. And then it gives you all the different places you can find it. So as an alarm cry or a war cry, you go to Joshua 6:5 and verse 20, and Jeremiah 20, verse 16, and Ezekiel 21:27, and Amos 1:4, and 2:2, and Zephaniah 1:16, and Job 39, all of these. And all of the other ways in which the word Truah comes up.
Yeah, so it looks like the blast for March is the one that's the one that's in the Torah, because the others are all, well, everything's later than everything, so it doesn't. But
yeah, so there are probably at least 1 or 2 dozen other places where this word pops up in the Hebrew Bible, but not at all clear that Truah means what it means for us today, which is when the Cantor, it's one of the 3 things the Cantor cries out, and then the shofar player plays a certain, Truah, by the way, is the shofar blast that has 9 staccato notes. That's the Truah. Tekiah is the one long blast. Shavarim is the 3. And then, why am I telling you this? Norm Weiss could be teaching us a master class on blowing shofar. Norm, are you blowing shofar this year?
If I were asked, I would.
Good, you
But
will be.
I think the whole arrangement has changed. I think it's just
Has
one
it?
person.
I'm not in charge of that, but I'll find out.
Yeah, no, I was fired a couple of years ago
Oh no.
without any compensation, by the way.
All right, Norm, you are an elder statesman of shofar blowing at WRT. So if you feel up to playing shofar, we would love to hear your shofar. Shofar show good. Rob and Aaron.
So both in this passage and in much of the Talmud passages that we look at, when you're translating it literally, word for word, it's what you describe as that, just a word cloud, and it's left for the translator to fill in the blanks. Mm-hmm. And I've just been wondering for quite some time whether or not that's just a feature of ancient Hebrew itself. Is that like an indication of how writing has evolved over the centuries, or is it intentional that it's kind of just fill in the blank, a little mystical?
It's a great question. I mean, I relish the ambiguities and what I call the fact that the lacunae or gaps. In other words, where we want meaning to be spelled out explicitly, Torah and the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, does not provide that. My guess, however, is that as much as I think the authors really mine the laconic nature of biblical Hebrew for its poetic power, because ambiguity can be a source of poetry.
I'm sorry?
I think that they're just working within the confines of the language that they had, and that in general, languages evolve to become more complex and more specific. Yeah. Right? So generally, interestingly, I'm trying to mute Norm. Generally, that is the pattern in the evolution of languages. Like languages grow, not shrink, and more specificity is applied through various new words that connote new meanings. And so this might just be a function of the fact that biblical Hebrew is an old language. In even modern Hebrew probably has somewhere between 20 and 30,000 words. English has somewhere on the order of 5 to 10 times the volume of just words in the English language. So something gets gained, something gets lost in that. But I think most ancient languages, like what I've read of translators who have translated like the Odyssey, like Homer, have talked in similar ways. So when I've heard interviews with translators of the Odyssey, for instance, or Beowulf or Chaucer even, people say, yeah, they're working with a language that just had fewer words to connote meaning. And so there's more that a translator can do through his or her own creativity. That's how
So think about it like how the media might portray cavemen speaking, right? It's like short, terse, kind of.
Right.
Okay.
Oog want meat, right? Maybe right. Okay, cool. Susan Esther.
Yes. Am I okay?
Yep,
can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you great.
With all due respect to you, Rabbi, and to piggyback on what your father said, there are three things that you mentioned: rest, blast, and offering. I can only speak for myself how it is involved into what I feel is more of commercialism now. We're looking for the right stationery card. We're looking for the right gift to give, the right clothes to wear. It's become less of introspection as more trying to impress. I speak only for myself, but I think it's lost the simplicity. If those are the three things that are emphasized, I think the holiday for me has lost that simplicity and has become more of an event than a religious experience.
Well, you're now preaching my message. So anytime you want to get on a Bima or in a Zoom and say that and remind the Jewish people what the holiday is about and what it is not about. And some of you even caught my snarky reference to breaking out the Louboutins. Those are fancy shoes. Those of you who don't know. Yeah. So yeah, you would not be the first. Many people say, ugh, it's the high holiday fashion show every year. And right, so back to basics, but really, really basics. I mean, I still think that even with your earnest plea for simplicity and getting back to the meaning of the holiday, it would still feel off if somebody walked into the sanctuary this year with a goat and said, "Rabbi, will you please sacrifice?" I've been studying the Torah, and I read this thing where I'm supposed to remember a blast and bring a goat for a burnt offering. Where can I do that? So yes, the holiday has certainly evolved from its biblical roots. And yes, I feel that, like many things, particularly in the Reform world, but honestly, it's bled into all corners of modern Jewish life, except perhaps in the parts of the Jewish world that do not accept that it is 2023, like in Monsey or Crown Heights or what have you. I think that, you know, the Achilles heel of Reform Judaism is that it insists on having a practice that is consistent with modernity and modern living. But the problem with that is that you can strip out many of the aspects of our Jewish practice that are actually meaningful in the interest of being modern people. So anyway, that feels like a different sermon for a different Shabbos. But Norm, did you have a further comment, or shall we proceed?
Just one thing, John. The holidays that are given a lot of attention all have to do with events over the course of the year, and God is involved in just about all of them, maybe Purim questionably. The new year is just a mark on the calendar.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing holy about a mark on the calendar, and maybe
that's right.
Some of this.
Right, and I think that's actually probably one of the 2 or 3 most important things that we should derive from what the Torah says about Rosh Ha-Shanah, but even more what it does not say. First of all, it doesn't even say that it's the new year. It simply says month 7, day 1. We don't know we do not yet know from this passage alone what is significant about this time of year, other than that it's a time you're supposed to commemorate. Like, there's something important going on here. But unlike Pesach, like the passage about Pesach, which precedes this, and the passage about counting the 50 days from Pesach to the next festival, which we know as Shavuot, though that is not the name given in this passage, and all the things that you're supposed to do around Pesach and the Omer and Shavuot are written out extensively, and they all have to do with agriculture and the harvest seasons of the spring. And similarly, the passage that comes after this, which is about Sukkot, you know, it's funny, if my bar mitzvah had not been on Sukkot and had been, for instance, in May, when you read this passage ordinarily, and I'd been given the verses on Rosh Hashanah, it's 3 verses and you have to include something else. Whereas the bar mitzvah portion that I learned was like 18 verses, because the amount of ink given over to Sukkot in this same chapter is voluminous, whereas the amount of ink given over to Rosh Hashanah is very, very, very terse. It's very, very small. Even Jay.
What I was going to say is you said you have like 3 paragraphs in the Torah about Rosh Hashanah. This was all written during the time of the temple. I mean, we have the shofar and then not working, etc. The temple is destroyed. We then have rabbinic Judaism. We have rabbis. So we have a day when nobody's supposed to work. So the rabbis figure out, or the sages, you know, we have all these people, nobody's working, they're hanging around. We're just going to blow the shofar and then they're going to go home. So let's add some stuff.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I mean, the Torah and the Talmud will never disclose well, that's not true. The Talmud will, but often I'm convinced holidays evolve not only because of, you know, spiritual considerations, but also pragmatic considerations. So I love your kind of hypothetical ancient rabbinic community going, well, what do we do with all these Jews who know they're not supposed to work today? There's more to it than that. You know, so that I not bury the lead more than I already have. In ancient times, for the ancient Israelite community, as you said, Jay, when the temple still stood, The biggest festival of the year was, drum roll please, anyone know? It was Sukkot. It was the harvest festival at the end of the growing season. And so more space is dedicated to the observance of Sukkot than any other holiday in the Torah. And in the rabbinic literature, Sukkot also retains its paramount significance, so much so that the rabbis often refer to Sukkot as Hechag, which means the holiday. So it is shorthand that everybody in its time understood this is the big one. And in fact, the year was very much kind of like gravitated around Sukkot as the one biggest time of the year where the entire community was expected to assemble for 8 days, 7 days plus an 8th day festival called Shmini Atzeret, which is a cessation again of all work, but it's the kind of end of the Sukkot season. So for 8 days, you were supposed to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and more sacrifices and offerings of a very specific nature are commanded for this holiday. More individual regulations are commanded for this holiday. So this is the big one because, of course, it was the holiday that represented the very life and death of the Israelite community, right? If your crops grew, praise God. If your crops didn't go so well that year, God help us, right? But everything was about Sukkot. And therefore, the leading theory on why Rosh Ha-Shanah and even Yom Kippur are so tiny in the biblical record is because they were tiny. They were actually preludes to Sukkot. Sukkot is observed on the 15th day of the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar. So it always has to fall in its harvest season. It always falls on a full moon. It's a harvest moon festival. Yom Kippur, if you think of Sukkot as the primary holiday in the month of Tishrei, the 7th month of the calendar, then you trace back from Sukkot and can figure out what Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are supposed to mean. 5 days before Sukkot, you have a Yom Kippur, which we're going to look at, which is all about purification. And in ancient times, it was not the spiritual character of a person that was being purified on or by Yom Kippur. It was the temple itself. It was a physical purification. How many of you actually clean your barbecue grill at the end of every season? Okay, don't say yes. We recently bought a new grill and we were sternly instructed by the salesman, you have to clean this every year. And by the way, I have a guy who for the low price of $300 will come to your house and clean your grill for you. So ancient sacrificial worship was basically just a big barbecue. It was a cookout. An altar is nothing more than a wood-burning fire surrounded by a ring of stones with a metal grate on top. I don't know about you, but where I come from, that's called a grill or a barbecue, right? And you keep the flame going all the time and you roast meat on it. Like, yeah, that's the whole point. Roast meat and veggies and grains and little cakes, and you can toast some matzahs on it. That's the central festival on Sukkot. Yom Kippur was about purifying the altar, which is just getting ready for Sukkot. If you're going to be offering sacrifices every single day, you got to have a clean grill. And Rosh Hashanah was the beginning of the month where all of the festival happens. So how many of you have ever had a successful Rosh Hashanah where you started cooking and cleaning one day before? It doesn't work, right? It's a production. If you've ever hosted a holiday meal, you know that it is not a day of kind of thing. So there's getting back to the Jay Landau framework here. There's a lot of pragmatic wisdom in getting ready for the big holiday starting on the first of the month. You know, Rosh Hashanah may be a very small observance because it's not really anything more than, hey, folks, Sukkot is coming in 2 weeks. Time to get ready. Okay, we're going to blow a shofar. You know, there's going to be a public sound so that you know what's happening. But not much more than that. Like, stop everything, get ready for Sukkot. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say as a lead up to what the Bible or what the Torah has to say about Rosh Hashanah. On the one hand, not much, but on the other hand, so much. So much in the not much, right? We can infer profound meaning about what Rosh Hashanah meant or did not mean from as much from what is not said as from what is said. I did say there was one other passage I wanted to look at, and so I'll call it up. And again, you can, when you have a copy of your own syllabus, you can do this on your own. Oh yeah, there were two other passages actually. So I'll show you how the Book of Numbers puts it. There is a parallel passage in the Book of Numbers, and let's see if it adds anything to our understanding. I think it does, but not a whole lot. Okay, so the Book of Numbers also talks about this time of year, chapter 29, and it says, "In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. You shall observe it as a day when the horn is sounded." Okay, this feels like a repeat, but I want to just point out that it's consistent with what we know. Same day, same month, sacred occasion, same phrase, Mikra Kodesh. Kol melechet avodah lo tasu. That's the phrase that Steve Maskett singled out for us to think about. Do not work. Yom Truah Yihiyeh Lachem. The only difference is it doesn't say Yom Zichron Truah. It says it's a day of the blast, whereas the book of Leviticus says it's a day for remembering the blast, or as our translator put it up on Sefaria, a day for commemorating a sacred occasion with a blast. Okay, I'm not convinced that that is intrinsically the most significant difference. And then it goes on to say, what do you do on this day? Va'asitem olah l'reach nichoach l'Adonai. Present a burnt offering of pleasing odor to Adonai. So the language is a little bit embellished, but again, the concept is identical. Par ben bakar achat, so you can take a bull of the herd, or ayil echad, a ram. Kvasim b'nei shana, yearling lambs shivat tamimim. 7 of them without blemish, pure. And then oh yeah, by the way, bring some grain. So it gets into a little bit more specificity around the burnt offering, which Leviticus mentioned. And then that's it. First 6 verses, done. In addition to the burnt offering of the new moon with its meal. So in other words, you would always be bringing a burnt offering on any new moon, right? 12 or 13 times a year, there's going to be a new moon with its meal offering and prescribed libations. So meat, starch, beverage, all of which are offerings to God. In addition to that, there's a special one for day 1 of month 7, which is a holiday that we call Rosh Ha-Shanah, but the Bible does not. And then it goes on to the Day of Atonement. So we're not there yet. We're still on just Rosh Hashanah. So the other text I thought I would bring, I really brought Numbers 29 as a demonstration of how little is said about Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't really add tremendous substance to what we already learned from the book of Leviticus. Now, scholars have also observed, there is this curious passage at the beginning of the 40th chapter of the book of Leviticus. And I will show that to you. That looks like this. Here it is. Okay, in the 25th year of our exile, Leviticus is Ezekiel, the prophet, is the 3rd and last of the 3 major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, whose books appear in that sequence in the Bible, in the Tanakh. So the book of Ezekiel is fully exilic. It is written during the time of the Babylonian exile. In the 25th year of our exile, the 14th year after the city had fallen, city being Jerusalem, at the beginning of the year, the 10th day of the month, on that very day, God's hand came upon me and it brought me there. All right, so this is the beginning of a prophecy that the prophet Ezekiel is saying, I had a prophecy, I had this prophetic experience, God put his hand on me, but more importantly, he's giving us a specific time. And the reason this is significant for us is this is the only place in the Bible that uses the following expression. Can you see it, what I've highlighted in the Hebrew? The Rosh Ha-Shanah. the Rosh Ha-Shanah. Right. So this is the only place in the entire Tanakh where we have Rosh Ha-Shanah, literally at the head of the year. But if you read further, he's not even talking about Rosh Hashanah. It's actually the 10th day of this month. It's a Yom Kippur. What does that mean? What it means is that in biblical times, the phrase Rosh Hashanah did not mean what it means to us today. That's what it means. I'm going to take a momentary pause because I realized that my plug came undone and I'm losing battery by the minute. One moment. Okay, good. Now we're cooking with gas. All right, any questions thus far? We've looked at 3 short passages. We've looked at Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel, all of which tell us basically the same thing, which is that the Bible doesn't think of Rosh Hashanah the way we think of Rosh Hashanah. Trish.
Speaking of cooking, I'm getting a little confused, and I get confused all the time about this. What's the difference between making a burnt offering and a pilgrimage festival? So pilgrimage festivals, everyone has to come, but making offerings, that's also done at the temple, right? All those offerings are done at the only temple there is. So
correct. Yeah, I mean, the Bible, the Torah itself is internally inconsistent about this. So it's going to be really hard to give you like a clean and simple answer. Offerings and sacrifices of various sorts, when we talk about burnt offerings, we're usually talking about a whole animal, parts of which are completely burned up on the altar. Those are the token parts that belong to God. They tend to be the parts you would not want to eat anyway. Bones, fatty stuff, entrails, organs. Okay, offal. The choicest meat parts, the thigh and the breast, will become food for the high priest and his family. The other parts will go to variously feed the priestly household or sometimes for the poor and the needy. So sacrifices and offerings are the mainstay religious practice of the Hebrew Bible. The books of the Bible are internally inconsistent about where and how these sacrifices and offerings were to be performed. The picture one gets is that the dominant practice throughout ancient Israel was sacrifice at your local shrine. The book of Deuteronomy makes it clear that that is not what God had in mind. And the book of Deuteronomy in particular makes it clear that you can't just sacrifice anywhere you like. You have to go to Jerusalem. Now, if you live in or near Jerusalem, that's not hard. You take a bunch of animals with you and you saddle up your donkey or your camel and you get going and you go to the temple and you bring your animal or animals and the priest sacrifices it in the ritual way and you're good to go. But for most people who lived far away, it might not have been practical or feasible to bring your animals to Jerusalem. So the idea was that pilgrims would travel from near and far to exchange money in the temple courtyards, which were marketplaces, for the animals they could then bring for sacrifices. In other words, in so many ways, an intricate economy was built up around the sacrificial cult. It really is not merely a purely spiritual or religious practice. It was also a way of sustaining the central organizing structure of the ancient Israelite Commonwealth, which, by the way, was very buddy-buddy, at least at times, with the monarchy. So the whole thing was kind of an interwoven system of economic sustenance as well as spiritual sustenance, if that makes sense. But yeah, the passages that we've read, or the passage we read in Leviticus at least, presumes that these holidays are to be done as pilgrimages, meaning Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot. It's not clear that it is clear that you do not travel on what we call Rosh Ha-Shanah and Yom Kippur. It's a stop day, so you're not packing up. But the 7-day festivals in particular, they are 7 days. They're week-long festivals to allow for pilgrimage. Okay, that's the best I can do with an easy question with a thorny answer. Let's take Susan, Esther, Mom and Dad, Norman.
If I'm reading you correctly or listening to you correctly, you seem to show the insignificance of this holiday, or the lesser importance.
Yeah, the lesser significance of this holiday, these two holidays in biblical times.
But my question is, at what point has it become more significant to the extent that we're honoring those days with huge events in synagogues?
And that is why this is a 4-week course. You will come back and you will learn. Mom and Dad.
This is probably just restating the same thing, but it seems that at some point the rabbis decided this was an event too good to give up. And we got a whole lot of other stuff that we could do with this,
right.
And I don't know in what century, of the, in the evolution of the religious practice that took place. Right. But at some point, it just seemed that it said, we got a lot more that we could make out of this that would be meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is correct. And innovation comes about, I would say, along two vectors, a positive vector and a negative vector. So there are probably internal impulses to innovate in a positive way around, as you say, the opportunity that's too good to pass up to have a significant observance at this time of year. But there's also the innovation that is produced in response to trauma. Right. So a lot of the reversal or the rearranging of the primacy of Sukkot relative to the two holidays that come before it, Rosh Ha-Shanah and Yom Kippur, has to do with the destruction of the temple, the urbanization of the Jewish community, the fact that Jews were no longer primarily a landed or agricultural community. Like, so much happens between the biblical period and the rabbinic period that the holidays also evolve in dynamic tension with those changes. And so, yes, it is, but it is, and with all of that, we should never diminish the role of rabbinic ingenuity and creativity. And so on the one hand, you have these incredibly ingenious spiritual teachers who would probably, with a wink or a twinkle in their eyes, have said, we're just preserving the tradition. But their way of preserving often twists the meaning of things so that, clearly the way we observe Rosh Ha-Shanah and Yom Kippur today is not anything that the ancient rabbis could have imagined, but is very much consistent with the way they thought about the holidays and their importance and what we would call spiritual development, and not just a biblical community coming together to offer sacrifices at a temple, which is what religion was. I don't think they would have used the word religion, but that's the idea. Norm and then Steve.
Well, it seems that biblical Judaism had to do with functions, activities. I don't think there was anything very introspective or spiritual about it. Modern Judaism, and maybe because of the loss of the land and the temple, is not having anything to do with its activity, but what is introspective and spiritual. And there's a major gap. A biblical Jew didn't have to think very much about God or the mitzvot, or he had to think about pilgrimages and sacrifice. No longer the case today.
100%. Okay. All right, let's take Steve and then we'll read a little more.
I think the one thing that's clear from the biblical passages you shared is that the first of the month and the 10th of the month are part of a holiday season leading up to Sukkot. That's reinforced in the Numbers passage with the reference to the actual sacrifices, which are very similar to the daily sacrifices of Sukkot. So it really connects it very nicely. And so this concept of a holiday season that is built upon Sukkot, which I guess was probably the borrowing of an agricultural festival that pre-existed the concept of Hag in the Bible. These holidays leading up to it sort of give it its own flavor, I think, as a way of further claiming the holiday of Sukkot as this community's.
That's right, big one. Thanks, Steve. Ruth, were you trying to chime in?
Well, I was just listening to you. I was thinking just what was just said, that food was important, and Sukkot and a good harvest was important. And how do you make the high holidays become high holidays? You have to give us something. When I think of them, I'm thinking of your word cloud. I'm thinking of asking for repentance. The gates are closing, something that has to do with my inner self. And that makes it a high holiday.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the genius of the rabbinic mind. All of the things that are in our word cloud for the high holidays are very much a product of the rabbinic mind. Somebody else wrote me a private message in the chat and said, where do we get the book of life from? We'll get there, but it's not in the Bible. Like that's going to be the answer for so many of the things that we think about, the good and the bad. Yeah, the fashion show, but also repentance, the gates are closing, like the incredibly rich set of images, the whole idea of, you know, crowning God king, today the world is born anew, like all of the things that life passes by like a cloud, we are but dust and ashes, like all of the things that are so powerful about the High Holy Day experience. And from the High Holy Day liturgy, they're not a new reform innovation, but they are also post-biblical. They are rabbinic. Okay, so that actually is a good segue to look at a couple of short rabbinic texts, so we can begin to see what the rabbis have to do in order to get from what the Bible tells us about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to what we know about these holidays today. And of course, you have to come back for the next 3 weeks, because that's the journey we're on to do this learning together and to unpack this mystery together. So I'm going to just call up Mishnah Rosh Hashanah 1. So Mishnah, most of you studied Mishnah with me. For those of you who didn't, Mishnah is the earliest collection of rabbinic writing of a legal-ish nature, but it's really a handbook to how to live a Jewish life, written between the first and the third centuries of the Common Era. So it's CE, or what our Christian friends call AD. It is not biblical. It is post-biblical, and written by generations of rabbis in and around the Holy Land. So it's not an exilic work, largely under Roman occupation. Very much grapples with the changes that have affected the Jewish community, most saliently the destruction of the temple, the disempowerment of the hereditary priesthood, the loss of an independent monarchy, the loss of sovereignty, the loss of a military, and in certain cases, the persecution of the Jewish community. And rebellion, and the failure of two big rebellions, one between 67 and 74, which was the first great Judean uprising, which results in the destruction of the temple. And then the second, which really put the nail in the coffin for the Jews of this part of the world, the Bar Kokhba uprising, the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was also quashed by Rome. All of that is the historical backdrop for the growing up, the development of this literature that we come to know as Mishnah. 6 are the orders of the Mishnah. They tackle topically all the different themes and practices of Jewish life, and it's not so much a theological work, though theology is embedded in it. So I was about to say belief, but that's probably not the first or even the third thing I would want you to know about the Mishnah. It's not really a text about what we believe. It's much more a text about what we do as Jews. So Rosh Hashanah is a tractate within the order, as I said, called Moed, which means seasons or appointed times. And no surprise, Rosh Hashanah, the tractate, is about Rosh Hashanah. How do we observe Rosh Hashanah? And notice the contrast here compared to what the Bible says about Rosh Hashanah. This is what the rabbis say about Rosh Hashanah. So this is the beginning of tractate Rosh Hashanah. reading from the very top, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hem. There are 4 New Years. This is a crazy statement. So the very first thing the rabbis say, but of course, now we know they're responding to a dilemma. It's the dilemma it was the very first dilemma we identified today. The dilemma is, in the ordinal cycle of numbers, which is the first month of the Hebrew calendar? Which is month number 1? Does anyone know the name of it? Sounds
Tishrei?
like what's that?
You saying Tishrei?
No. Tishrei is month number 7. So month number 1 is Nisan. It's the month that sounds like a car. All right, so Nisan. All of the Hebrew months are Babylonian names, by the way. They're not derived from Hebrew. So Nisan, which is spring. The Bible doesn't call it Nisan. The Torah calls it Aviv. In the season of Aviv is when you observe, and the signature festival in Nisan is Pesach. So the first big theme of the year is the Pesach, which is a early spring festival for newborn lambs and the shepherding community, as well as the beginning of the plantings or the beginning of the harvest in spring for grain, which is why for farmers, the signature observance of the Pesach season is something called Chag HaMatzot, or the Feast of Matzahs, which are little unleavened barley cakes in the ancient community. So Pesach is the main holiday in the ordinal month number 1. But as we just said, the biggest holiday year comes a half year later, the beginning of the 7th or the middle of the 7th month, which we call Tishrei. Those are 2. The rabbis are telling us here there are actually 4. So the rabbis are getting around the dilemma by saying, well, actually, there's more than one New Year. I saw Arlene Goldsmith's expression when I said, yeah, Rosh Ha-Shanah is not the first month of the year. It's like her eyes went wide, and it's like, yeah, that's really confusing for people. New Year, we think of as January 1st. January is the first month of the Gregorian calendar. Doesn't work that way on the Jewish calendar. So, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hem. There are 4 New Years. As they translate here, there are 4 days in the year that serve as the New Year. That's nice. Bechad b'Nisan, on the 1st of Nisan, Rosh Ha-Shanah. So look at the terminology here. The 1st of Nisan is a Rosh Ha-Shanah, right here, Rosh Ha-Shanah, La Melachim v'la Regalim. It is the beginning of the year for kings and for pilgrimages. Regalim are pilgrimages. Okay, so on the 1st of Nisan is the new year for kings, as the translator provides very helpful gloss. It is from this date that the years of a king's rule are counted. So the king is inaugurated. It's like our January 21st or whatever the 3rd Sunday in January is, right? In the biblical community, the rabbis teach kings were inaugurated or coronated on the 1st of Nisan. And the 1st of Nisan is also the new year for the order of the festivals. They say for the regalim, for the pilgrimages specifically, but because Pesach is actually the first of the Jewish holidays in the agricultural cycle, right? Grain's got to grow for a long time before you harvest it on Sukkot. So Pesach is the beginning of the harvest season. Shavuot, 50 days later, 7 weeks later, you have the first fruits that have emerged. And then finally, after the summer is when you get to have the big harvest. Kelly and I are very tied to our farm share we get every week. I would say, especially this time of year, like 98% of the vegetables we're eating, and most of the proteins too, come from a Hudson Valley collective of farms. Over the last few years that we've been subscribers to this wonderful service called Good Food Farmers, by the way, go online, and if you choose to sign up, just mention us. I think we get like a free gift if you mention me. It's something like raw honey or whatever. They have great stuff though, and it's really not it's not exorbitant. And every week we get a box delivered straight to our door in White Plains of fresh vegetables and meat and grain and dairy and great stuff from a whole consortium of mostly Hudson Valley farms. We've become much more tied as a result to the natural cycle of what's in season, right? So we're getting to the best time of the year. Like the menu right now, and you choose from a menu, by the way. They don't just give you a box of what they think you want. You can choose. So you can always get beets and turnips year round. But right now we've got zucchini and summer squash, and tomatoes like are off the charts, and you can get cucumbers and peppers and onion. You can get onions year round, kale, arugula, baby kale, various lettuces. Spinach is more of a winter vegetable, so we'll get spinach not so much right now. Anyway, what they're suggesting here is that the agricultural season starts in the spring and goes to the fall. But there are other festivals here. So here it says, on the 1st of Elul, that is tonight, by the way, or tomorrow, is the new year for animal tithes. All the animals born prior to that date belong to the previous tithe year. So if you have to give 10% of your best of your flock or herd to the temple or to the religious establishment, you compute this based on which animals are born when. Animals born now and after, meaning 1st of Elul and after, you tithe them in the coming year. Animals born prior to tonight or tomorrow, you would tithe for the previous year. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the new year for animal tithes is on the 1st of Tishrei. So there's a dispute. This is very Mishnaic. Some say, no, it's Elul 1, month 6, day 1. These two rabbis say, actually, it's the day we call Rosh Ha-Shanah. They don't resolve the dispute, which is also highly Mishnaic. It goes on to say, the 1st of Tishrei has its own new year identity. It is the new year for counting years. Right? So if Pesach or Nisan is the new year for counting months, Rosh Hashanah is the new year for years. That is true, by the way. One of the first things we will do on Erev Rosh Hashanah is proclaim the new year. We will say, this is the year Chameshet Alafim U'Sheva Me'ot U'Shmonim Ve'arba, 5784. And there was, I think it was Conan O'Brien, or maybe it was Jay Leno, who made some very funny remark about, I'm still not used to the fact that it's a new year. I keep writing 5783 on my checks. Okay. I think it's funny. Okay. Let's complete this passage. As will be explained in the Gemara, for calculating sabbatical and jubilee as well. In other words, that starts on 1st of Tishrei, which we call Rosh Hashanah, as well as for planting, for determining the years of Orla, which is a special process for circumcising trees. Don't worry about it. Pruning is what it means. The 3-year period from when a tree has been planted, during which time its fruit is forbidden. You're not allowed to prune the fruit in the first 3 years. If you ever wondered, by the way, about the custom of the upsharon, not cutting a boy or a child's hair until the 3rd birthday, it comes from this. You may have seen this, like with little kids, particularly who are being raised a little bit more observant, their hair like down to here. Is that a boy? Is it a girl? No, it's a boy. He just hasn't had his upsharon yet. It's based on this custom of not pruning the trees until year 3. And for tithing vegetables, as vegetables picked prior to that date cannot be tied together with vegetables picked after that date. Is any of this stuff relevant to us today? Probably not so much. Those of us who don't live on kibbutz aren't really so into tithing and pruning and all of these ritual restrictions on it. But what they're saying is there is still an agricultural significance to the day we call Rosh Hashanah. And then finally, it's going to give us the last two. On the 1st of Shevat is the new year for the tree. The fruit of a tree that was formed prior to that date belongs to the previous tithe year and cannot be tied together with fruit that was formed after that date. This ruling, in accordance with the statement of Beit Shammai, but Beit Hillel, who always prevails, says the new year for the trees is on the 15th of Shevat, a date we all know as Tu B'Shvat. So the rabbis begin tractate Rosh Hashanah with 4 new years. There's the 1st of Nisan, which begins the holiday calendar and the agricultural calendar. That is the month in which Pesach is observed. Okay, that's one. I love that my little thumbs up popped up. I don't know how to take that off, but okay. Fun times. There we go. That's one. Two, the second New Year is I'll put it back up on the screen so that I remember it. The second New Year is for the inauguration of kings and the order of festivals. The first of Elul for tithing animals and also for counting years. That's what we call Rosh Ha-Shanah. And then Tu B'Shvat. Okay, reading on. The rabbis add, and I think this is where things start to get a little bit more familiar for us non-agricultural folks. At 4 times of the year, the world is judged. On Pesach, judgment is passed concerning grain. Will the grain grow? Will the grain not grow? On Shavuot, 50 days post-Pesach, concerning fruits that grow on a tree, first fruits. Will they grow? Will it be a good season? Anyone had peaches and nectarines lately? Unbelievable this season. I don't know what they put in the water. It's probably climate change. Hotter, longer days of high heat produce more sugary fruit generally. But it's a great season for fruit in my house. Okay, third is Rosh Ha-Shanah. All creatures pass before God like sheep, as it is stated, the one who fashions their hearts alike, who considers all their deeds. And on the festival of Sukkot, they, meaning creation, is judged concerning water, the rainfall of the coming year. Now, this passage starts to alter our understanding of what the rabbis really care about. Yes, there are these 4 times of the year that are New Year's, but more importantly, there are 4 times of the year where the world or some part of the world stands in judgment. The way I think of standing in judgment is things hang in the balance. Remember that ancient Israel was not like ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt had an economy based on what natural phenomenon? Anyway, you can go back to 6th grade, 7th grade, what you learned in your world civ class. How did the ancient Egyptians...
Flooding of the Nile.
Right? And the ancient Egyptians mastered an irrigation agriculture based on the flooding of the Nile, and that's what allowed their civilization to thrive. The land of Israel marks a stark contrast to that agricultural norm. There is no Nile in Egypt. The only thing that is a real river, the Jordan, is like a piddly, muddy creek. It doesn't actually irrigate the land around it particularly well. And in fact, it begins at the Galilee, it terminates at the Dead Sea, and most of the land surrounding that part of the Jordan is completely barren. Whereas the sea itself would tell you, we're dead, right? Nothing grows. So it's completely choked with salt. So the ancient Israelite economy was painfully dependent on rainfall. And much ancient Israelite practice is based on rainfall. Most scholars agree that waving a lulav and an etrog is a form of a rain dance. It is this naturalistic, agricultural, religious practice of waving various botanicals around, which require various degrees of water to thrive. Everything from the palm tree that does well in the desert to the weeping willow, which does not do well uprooted from its water source at all. But you take these species, you wave them around, you do this little hokey pokey, and the end result is that God's going to bring the rains back. And lo and behold, most years in the land of Israel, Sukkot marks the boundary between the 2 seasons of the year, which are called winter and summer, but really best are described as dry and wet. So things hang in the balance in Israel, right? You do not know whether or not your crops will grow. You are entirely dependent on rainfall. And that is unlike irrigation and mastery of the flooding of the Nile, much harder to master rainfall. You're just entirely at the whim of nature, or our ancestors would have said it was all up to God. Now you're starting to get a sense of what the rabbis really care about here. So you've got on Pesach, judgment concerning grain. Will the grain grow or not? On Shavuot, fruit. And on Sukkot, water. right? Will the rain come this winter to nourish next year's crops? But one of these is different, and that is this. And they do use the term Rosh Ha-Shanah, Kol ba'ei ha'olam ovrin lifanav kivnei maron. We all pass before God like sheep, b'nei maron, like members of a flock. Shene'emar, as it is written in the book of Psalms, Hayotzer yachad libam, the one who created their hearts all together, Hamevin el kol ma'asehem, the one who knows all their deeds. So there's a very different kind of judgment that's happening on Rosh Hashanah, according to the rabbis. What is it? How would you describe what has just happened in this remarkable text?
We went from the agricultural to the spiritual.
Precisely. Couldn't have said it better. We have, in one line, in two phrases, we have made a tremendous leap from Judaism being chiefly concerned with agriculture to something much different, to a Judaism that is as much about what it means to be a human being in the sight of God. That's an important statement, because without that one statement, nothing else that we're going to study over the next few weeks makes any sense. So I'm going to skip over a couple of the other texts. I kind of knew that I was biting off a lot for today's class. I tend to do that, but that's okay. Those who are engaged in the study and who want, to go back to the YouTube video or to read a little bit more from the syllabus, you'll have the syllabus in the next 48 hours. You can do that on your own. But my goal is that nobody is lost if all you do is show up Thursday at 10:15 to 11:45 and participate. Like the extra texts are great. They'll enhance your understanding. You won't be at a loss if you don't read them. But I would like to spend our last 5 or 6 minutes on the one remaining. I do want to get to one bit of Gemara today, since you signed up for a Gemara class. And that is, and you will want to read why Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, but it's a little bit complicated for me just to explain. So let me turn to a short passage of Gemara, of Talmud text. Okay, so this is Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, Tractate Rosh Hashanah from the Babylonian Talmud, page 16, A, paragraph number 6. Ditanya, as it was taught. All right, or here they say, the Gemara explains, as it is taught in a Baraita, a little bit of terminology refresh here. Baraita, texts that come from the time of the Mishnah, but that were not included in the Mishnah. All right, so there's like a whole directory or anthologies of these texts that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but that are contemporaneous. So first 3 centuries of the Common Era. All are judged on Rosh Hashanah, and their sentence is sealed on Yom Kippur. So this is an elaboration of the previous text that we just looked at, that on Rosh Hashanah, all pass before God like sheep before their shepherd. That's the thing that hangs in balance on Rosh Hashanah, as opposed to the other 3 quote unquote New Years where it's all about agriculture. All are judged on Rosh Hashanah and their sentence is sealed on Yom Kippur. This is what Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Yehuda, who often opposed Rabbi Meir in the academy, says, all are judged on Rosh Hashanah and their sentence is sealed each in its own time. Right? Everything is judged on Rosh Hashanah, but it really depends on when the final verdict is going to come through. On Passover, the sentence is sealed concerning grain. On Shavuot, concerning fruits that grow on a tree. And on the festival of Sukkot, they are judged concerning water, as we have seen. But humankind is judged on Rosh Hashanah with the sentence sealed on Yom Kippur. So that seems to be where the rabbis land, that this period is very much analogous to the agricultural festivals in that we are coming before God because life and death hang in the balance. And if you're an agricultural community, that is directly expressed through your relationship with water and crops. But what about all of the stuff about being a human being that doesn't have to do with just basic sustenance? But I think the rabbis are putting it out there that, hang on, folks, there's more to life than just living. Like, living is more than surviving. The other three are about basic survival. You got to have grain, you got to have fruit, and you got to have water for the whole system to work. But what about being a person? Isn't there more? And whereas the biblical community seems very much in the mix of basic survival, I think the rabbis are inviting us to go on a journey of, isn't there more? And that's where this idea of judgment before God comes in, that what we do here actually matters. And that, you know, whether you're a good person or a bad person, I don't think most of us accept what parts of the Torah tell us, which is if you're a good person, God will let it rain for you and your crops will grow. That's the book of Deuteronomy. If you're a bad person, God will dry up the land and you'll starve. Most of us do not any longer accept this theological premise. And I don't think the rabbis did either. I don't think they bought that hook, line, and sinker. So I think the rabbis want to say, wait a minute. There are things that hang in the balance that have to do with basic survival. But what about everything else that we do? Doesn't that matter too? Aren't there actions and consequences for all of the other parts about being alive? Okay, Aaron and Rob.
So I thank you for translating that for me. Literature is not my forte, so I didn't make that leap. But in that translation, we still choose the word judgment, which has a very negative connotation. And you said that you didn't think the rabbis meant it in that way, like good versus bad, but judgment has a very specifically negative.
Oh, no, I think they do. I think they do mean it the way we associate meanings with judgment. I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure they would have said it has a wholesale negative connotation, but I do think that they are used to living in a world in which just their sense of control over their environment, their destiny, was much smaller than ours. I think one of the great challenges and opportunities of living in the 21st century in America is that we operate under a fairly convincing array of evidence that we are in charge of our world. Whereas the ancient Jewish community did not. I think that the dominant experience for the ancients, our ancestors, was we're not in charge of any of this. And yet the rabbis want to insist, and yet your actions matter. And so judgment is, yes, both an opportunity to, you know, who loves taking tests and being evaluated. But on the other hand, the rabbis make it very clear that this idea of judgment is also an empowering notion, in that your character matters, your conduct matters, and that we are capable of redemption of ourselves through our actions. What I think the rabbis are rejecting is the simplistic notion that if you're good, it will rain, if you're bad, it won't, which the book of Deuteronomy presents. There may be some of that is still vestigial in rabbinic thought, but where they're going to go with this, and this is what we're going to study for the next few weeks, is much more nuanced than that. So that's how I would put it. It's a yes and response to what you're saying. Mom and Dad, Susan, Esther, and then I'm going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
Or Arlene too. You can chime in too.
Okay.
It's really a two-pronged analysis here, though, because although humankind is separated from the other natural phenomenon, the water, the trees, the crops, by other ethical considerations. But on the other hand, this passage really links us to the natural cycle.
Correct.
It says just as God will judge the crops and the water, you are also part of that cycle and subject to God's judgment.
Yeah, so I mean, it is fascinating. Yes, I very much value that observation that you've made about the text. In a different mindset, the rabbis could have had an entirely different tractate about the way God judges people. But that is not how they frame it. I mean, this is in Rosh Ha-Shanah. It's in Tractate Rosh Ha-Shanah, which up until the very end of today's class, we really heard nothing about Rosh Ha-Shanah as a kind of spiritual experience. We were talking much more about times of year and cycles of nature and agriculture. And those are the things that make up the stuff of biblical life and even rabbinic life. And yet they say, well, yeah, we're part and parcel of that too. Lovely, lovely observation. Susan Esther.
What strikes me is how life has become full circle. In ancient time, you mentioned how important climate is to the agriculture, to their survival. And climate control has become a major issue today, and how it controls so much of our crops and our lives and our survival.
What a powerful observation. But of course, things are right now in kind of like dire. We're getting emergency warnings that one plausible positive outcome of the mess of extreme weather events that are just harbingers of a much worse future for the next several decades, unless we really change, is that human beings may have more occasion and more evidence that we are not dissociated from the world of which we are the stewards.
Right.
And we've operated under that illusion for a very long time.
Right.
But you know, to use a bit of a crass phrase, those chickens have come home to roost. I think that it is going to be very hard for the generation of today's children and their children I think they may live more like biblical people, you know, with a pervasive consciousness of the link between humanity and the environment. And that would not be a bad outcome. It's a very profound thing to think about from a spiritual perspective. So, Arlene, do you want to chime in anything else here? And then I'm going to
Yes. I've been following what's happened in Maui, and as we were going over this particular part of our class today, I kept thinking of some of the interviews that were being done with the indigenous population on Maui, and them talking about how their land has been ruined, but it will get revived again. And also turning to some spiritualism in this process. So it's there.
Yeah, I mean,
it hasn't changed from biblical times in many ways.
I think that, again, we might be presented with an immensely important and even holy opportunity to go deeper into the spirituality of Judaism as an environmentally conscious tradition. That's a great way to end for today. Thank you for your study. Welcome to all who are new to our study. This class will be posted online in the next couple of days. Wishing you a Chodesh Tov, a very sweet and meaningful month of Elul, which is all about preparing for the season that is coming. And can't wait to greet you next week when I believe Cantor Kleinman will be joining our class as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.